The first discussion topic of this episode's Peace and Prosperity is North Korea, which has expressed its willingness to resume working-level negotiations with the United States, and the future direction of the talks after the departure of National Security Advisor John Bolton. Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee said in a statement on September 9th that North Korea has the willingness to sit down with the U.S. for comprehensive discussions in late September. However, just a day after the announcement was made, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the testing of a super-large multiple rocket launcher from Gyecheon, which is located north of Pyongyang. This is yet another military provocation in 17 days. Attention is focused on why the provocation was made immediately after consenting to resume nuclear negotiations. Nonetheless, U.S. President Donald Trump immediately responded by saying that having meeting is a good thing. Shortly after North Korea's signal of a resumption of dialogue, President Trump tweeted that he is to replace National Security Advisor John Bolton, a hardliner in North Korea. What is the reason behind his departure after a year and a half in office? And how will this replacement change the tone of U.S. negotiations with Pyongyang? As our second discussion point, we talk about a possible breakthrough in inter-Korean relations following the resumption of nuclear talks between Washington and Pyongyang. The third Inter-Korean Summit was held in Pyongyang from September 18th to the 20th last year. From the opening of the Joint Liaison Office in Kaesong to the signing of the Comprehensive Military Agreement, many arrangements were carried out to honor the spirit of the Panmunjom Declaration. But over the course of this year, there have been many ups and downs. Will North Korea's willingness to resume nuclear talks with Washington offer a breakthrough in inter-Korean relations as well? To shed light on these latest developments, our host, Bong Young-sik, Research Fellow at Yonsei University's Institute for North Korean Studies, is joined by Park Won-gun, Professor of International Studies at Handong Global University, in the studio. We also connect with guest experts on Skype, including Christine Lee, Research Associate at the Asia-Pacific Security Program, and Harry J. Kazianis, Senior Director of Korean Studies at the Center for the National Interest.
Hello and welcome to Peace and Prosperity. North Korea has expressed its willingness to come to the negotiating table once again after maintaining months of tense relations with the United States. We sit down with Professor Park Won-gun, Professor of International Studies at Handong Global University, to discuss the feasibility and potential aftermath of the working-level negotiations between North Korea and the United States. Hello, Professor Park.
Hello. Thanks
Good to have you here again.
Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about U.S.-North Korea in general and specifics, we have to deal with the breaking news, the resignation of John Bolton as National Security Advisor to the Trump administration. What's the background reason and what does it imply to the world security and Korean Peninsula?
Well, there are speculations in Washington, D.C. that the Security Advisor John Bolton will resign because we all know that there are differences between President Trump, Pompeo, and John Bolton about these important foreign policies, including the nuclearization of North Korea. And especially very recently, President Trump is trying to have a dialogue with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Right.
And he invited the Taliban leader in Camp David. And I heard that John Bolton pretty much opposed this kind of a dialogue because 9/11 is a very important day for the United States. And then John Bolton argued that the very day that it is not appropriate to have a dialogue with Taliban, allegedly known than one of these important figures to have
behind 9/11 terrorist attack.
Yeah, but it's finally they haven't met because Donald Trump at the last minute and he canceled this meeting. But that's one of the examples. But overall, John Bolton mentioned several times that he is not comfortable with some of the important foreign policy, especially the North Korean policy. And John Bolton said several times that he do not understand why President Trump keeps saying that he is some kind of fell in love with the Kim Jong-un.
Giving too much space to North Korea.
Right, he's trying to embrace the North Korea, the leader, and who is a dictator from this John Bolton's perspective. So that's why the John Bolton finally, he said that he's resigned, not fired by the President Trump, but he found out that they finally decided to get their own way.
Well, the resignation of Mr. John Bolton as National Security Advisor came in a very tricky timing because Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Korean government, Ms. Choi Sun-hee, made a turnaround of attitude and said that let's meet for working level negotiations targeting late this month or early next month. That's a very drastic change of attitude for North Korean government, which used to call Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a poisonous plant, right? So what accounts for this turnaround by North Korean government?
Well, first of all, we should not count on North Korea. North Korea is very notorious about not keeping their agreement. So I have some problem with their sincerity, whether they really want to have a meaningful negotiation with the United States or not. But at least I think they have a very clear intention. They want to save Trump's face because North Korea delivered two wrong messages through Donald Trump to the world. First one is after Panmunjom meeting, Donald Trump mentioned that North Korea's promised to have a working level talk within 2 or 3 weeks,
Right.
but they didn't show up.
But it has been more than 2 or 3 months, not weeks.
Yes, exactly. And then in August, President Trump once again showed the letter from the Kim Jong-un, and that letter include that after finishing the South Korea-United States joint military drill, North Korea will come to the negotiation table, but after even finished the joint drill, they didn't.
Right.
So at least the Trump have the two messages to the world. So this time, if North Korea continue to refuse to have any kind of a talk with the United States, it means that they're gonna put Donald Trump in the very difficult position domestically, because in Washington and the United States media and Congress, and they criticized Donald Trump's policy toward North Korea. North Korea, they did not keep their promise, and there is no meaningful steps and progress at all in terms of this denuclearization. So that's why I think North Korea at least come to the table in order to save Trump's face.
In the meantime, North Korea has test-fired 2 super large multiple rocket launcher fired from Gyecheonri. This seems to be in contradiction to the suggestion for the resumption of working level negotiations. So what does it account for this contradictory behavior?
I think North Korea's intention is pretty clear. They really wanted to develop their new weapon system, and they deployed this new weapon system in the field. In order to deploy to the field, they need this kind of a test. Since May 4th, the first time since year 2017, November, that's the last time they tested the ICBM. And then May 4th, they launched this new type of missiles, and then this was a 10th time since the year 2019. So they introduced 4 new type of weapons. So in order to, as I told you, deployed in the field, they need this. But problem is, you just raised a very important point that why they have a kind of a parallel pursuit of dialogue and at the same time this military provocation. Well, that is one of the responsibility by United States and even South Korean government, because since May 4th, first time North Korea launched these missiles, South Korean government and United States, they keep saying that there's no problem at all. And even President Trump said that every country has these similar things. That's a small one, routine, and it doesn't matter. Kind of the United States give North Korea some kind of indulgence. So that's why they are freely launching this kind of test. So I'm wondering whether they're going to continue until the end of this month, which they promised to have a working level talk, because at this moment, the President Trump also reiterate that doesn't matter for him. So that means in order to deploy the new weapon system in the field, North Korea has not to hesitate to have another round of tests.
I see. Well connected with an expert in the United States, Christine Lee, Research Associate at the Asia Pacific Security Program, for more. Hello.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I look forward to discussing these important issues with you.
Along with its intentions to talk expressed, Pyongyang also followed up with firing super large multiple rocket launcher. Do you think that North Korea will continue with its provocative measures in the course of the future while talks are undergoing between Washington and Pyongyang? And another question is, how do you assess the general consensus among U.S. experts and scholars about North Korea actually making meaningful denuclearization?
So I think that there's quite a bit of divergence between the United States' two primary allies that have a stake in these negotiations, namely Japan and South Korea. So I think both allies, I'll start off by saying, are quite concerned about this trend line of movement towards short-range ballistic missile tests, because in fact, it sort of, undermines their missile defense investments and sort of unravels the logic of their alliance with the United States. And so I think that actually both allies are quite concerned about North Korea's recent provocations. However, I think that Japan will be much more fixated on addressing these provocations immediately, whereas South Korea is willing to sort of address the broader question of continuing negotiations with North Korea in order to make progress on that front, while addressing these lower level provocations later down in the process.
Ms. Lee, the first Vice Minister of Choeson이, he said that they wanted to see new kind of a calculation that should be acceptable to North Korea. So what do you think about the North Koreans' expectation?
Sure. So interestingly enough, in the past few months or so, North Korea has sort of shifted its focus from, really reinforcing its desire for sanctions relief, and has begun to talk more and more about extracting security guarantees from the United States and as well as its allies. And so I think that, in fact, this is a very tactical move in that by shifting the focus from sanctions relief to moving towards sort of peace, any sort of peace agreement, it's actually trying to get to its original goal of sanctions relief. And what this means is that as the United States, North Korea moves towards a peace agreement, it can sort of fragment the sanctions regime that's already in place by sort of increasing illicit trade with China and Russia.
Christine Lee, thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, Professor Park, it seems like Christine Lee's analysis is in line with your own analysis, that the provocative measures by North Korea are likely to continue. So how do you see the future?
Well, basically, I agree with what Ms. Lee analyzed. But one thing I raised question about her analysis, that South Korea and the United States, we are not that seriously concerned about this North Korean's provocation at this very moment, especially at least the government level. I told you that President Trump said several times that it's no problem at all, and our government also is kind of respond in the same way. So that's why I have some kind of the perspective that North Korea will continue this kind of a military provocation in near future, which is very dangerous and very serious challenge, daunting challenge to South Korean national security.
But maintaining quiet and reserved attitude to North Korea's short-range missile tests may be necessary for maintaining the momentum for denuclearization negotiations.
But problem is this all for the newly developed North Korean's weapon system. Most of them, at least KN-23s and North Korean version of ATACMS, those two weapons, missiles, can put the nuclear warhead. That's just a really huge challenge. Well, it's okay. I know that I'm pretty much familiar with the argument that North Korea is kind of prepared to prepare the aftermath of denuclearization. Right. After they finally decide to dismantle their nuclear weapon, they need still conventional weapons. So that's why
To protect yourself.
Yeah,
right?
protect yourself. But the very important point that they are missing is that the people who argue that North Korea still have any meaningful military denuclearization step at all. That means still they can put the nuclear warhead and these very advanced missiles, and also South Korea and United States, we have no means to, prevent and protect from those missiles.
I see. It's good news that both North Korea and the United States are open for dialogue. But it is also important to note that South Korea has been working hard to make this happen over the years. Let's take a quick look.
2018 was the year that both South and North Korea affirmed their will for peace. After the Inter-Korean Summit on April 27th, which was held in Panmunjom, exchanges between the two Koreas have greatly increased. Then, the second Inter-Korean Summit took place in May, followed by the third Inter-Korean Summit in September, where President Moon Jae-in paid a visit to Pyongyang. The third summit in September, in particular, marked the peak in inter-Korean relations. On September 14, 2018, a joint liaison office between the two Koreas was opened inside the Kaesong Industrial Complex, which is designed to facilitate communication 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The Korean government's efforts to create peace on the Korean peninsula also led to the comprehensive military agreement on September 19th. Military officials from the two Koreas signed a comprehensive military agreement under the supervision of both President Moon and Chairman Kim. It was an agreement to not use force under any circumstances. During the first 3 months after the signing of the agreement, the two Koreas agreed to shut down 11 general posts and demilitarize the Joint Security Area, or the JSA. But inter-Korean relations took a hit yet again after the North Korea-US summit in Hanoi broke down, and talks between the two sides stalled. But on June 30th this year, both Kim and Trump met in Panmunjom thanks to South Korean government's mediation. September of 2018 was the month of hope, as the opening of the liaison office, the signing of the military agreement, and the third Inter-Korean Summit was held. But a year from then, inter-Korean relations are strained yet again. Attention is focused on how inter-Korean relations can find its right track with North Korea's willingness to come to the negotiation table.
First of all, if you remember, this time last year, September 2018, there is a euphoric mood for inter-Korean cooperation in conjunction with President Moon Jae-in's visit to Pyongyang and the joint declaration of September 19th and opening of joint liaison office in Kaesong on the 14th of September. But since then, for the past year, there has not been so much development on the front of inter-Korean cooperation, human exchange, or economic joint projects. What happened?
Well, not just the development, but total block and total halt of any meaningful inter-Korean exchange at all. I think definitely that's the North Koreans' choice. Still South Korean government, and we are trying our best to have a meaningful exchange and talk with North Korea, but simply they refused. I think they are going to back the old days. North Korea has always put the relationship between North Korea and United States first, and always the South Inter-Korean relationship is under this North Korean-US relationship. So unless North Korea have some kind of a meaningful agreement in terms of the denuclearization and the compensation measure with the United States, I don't think we have a chance. I mean, South Korea have a chance to have any meaningful exchange with North Korea.
See. What is the relationship between the degree of North Korea's denuclearization and inter-Korean relations? We connect with Harry Kazianis, the Senior Director of Korean Studies at the Center for the National Interest, for more analysis. Hello?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It was great to be on the show. Thank you very much.
Okay, the denuclearization talks have been stalled. So in that context, do you think partial sanction reliefs as a way of giving incentives to North Korea to come to talk about denuclearization, such as the Kaesong Industrial Complex operation resumption or the reopening of Mountain Kumgang tours, Do you see doing this in positive light, or do you believe that these measures must be done in parallel with North Korea actually taking steps toward denuclearization?
I think it's in the United States' interest to really push dramatically to get inter-Korean relations rolling. And I think the most obvious way to do that would be the Kaesong Industrial Complex. I think having different situations where you unite the railroads between North Korea and South Korea. I think all of these things are very critical. None of these things are national security threats to Seoul, to the United States, and they provide a strong inducement for Pyongyang to want to give up its nuclear weapons, to actually show the international community that it can be a responsible stakeholder. So I think this is something that the United States should offer to North Korea, especially now that the North Koreans seem like they want to talk again to the United States. So I think if Washington is thinking of different incentives that it can provide Pyongyang in order to get them not only back to the bargaining table, but to craft some sort of maybe small deal where the North Koreans would maybe either give up a small amount of nuclear weapons or maybe decide to close the Yongbyon nuclear facility, that could be one of those sweeteners to get Pyongyang to do that. And again, they are not things that are going to threaten U.S. national security or Seoul. I think they'd be a good inducement.
Well, just how much do you think that the South Korean government's stance to achieve peace through InterKorean project can actually contribute to improving U.S.-North Korean relations and denuclearization of North Korea?
Well, look, I think it's the foundation. The only way that you're going to have peace and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula is having the North and South having stakes in each other's economy, society, maybe even someday politics. I think the only eventual way to solve the Korean conundrum is through unification. And the only first steps that you're going to have in doing that are economic steps. And once the North, I think, starts seeing some of that economic prosperity, they're going to be much more inclined to give up their nuclear weapons because they're going to understand a fundamental truth. Those nuclear weapons actually make their security situation worse, not better.
All right, Senior Director Harry Kazianis, thank you so much for your analysis.
No problem. Thanks so much.
Professor Park, it seems like Senior Director Kazianis argued that we need to give North Korea some inducements, stakes in the game, which is economic cooperation in the context of inter-Korean relations, not U.S.-North Korea. Do you agree with that argument?
Well, in principle, it is necessary to give some kind of incentive to North Korea in order to give up their nuclear weapon. But problem is that we haven't started the first step yet. In order to bring some kind of incentive, first, North Korea needed to have some kind of a common definition of denuclearization. They have pretty clearly mentioned last December that denuclearization of North Korea is not the right term. Denuclearization of Joseon Peninsula, which means that they have no intention to
the entire Korean peninsula.
Entire Korea. So that's the first step. And also, we need some kind of end state. North Korea, we are not sure what's their final goal to, what kind of a nuclear, including WMD or not. We have no idea. And third one is we definitely have a roadmap too. But North Korea refused to have a roadmap. At least those basic things that should be come up with, have some kind of agreement with the United States and international community. Then definitely, yeah, I agree that we have to give some kind of compensation or corresponding measure in step that if North Korea have a really meaningful step toward the denuclearization.
Well, I'm judging from your response to Mr. Kazianis' argument in favor of doing something with economic projects, then it seems like there is not much role to be played by South Korean government at this point.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's the truth, because North Korea is clearly blocked all kind of a meaningful exchange with South Korea. So we haven't had any leverage over North Korea. So one thing I suggest to our government always that is we have to think about this very basic nature of the inter-Korean relations. I think there is no trust. We need far more time to have a trust building between these two, I can say countries. But we have to think about this very basic nature is like negotiation. So sometimes we have to pull, but sometimes we have to push. But at this moment, our government is just pulling the North Korea. That's why we are losing leverage over North Korea.
All right. All right, Professor Park Won-gun, thank you so much for your analysis and time.
Thank you for having me.
At the White House on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump said his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, fired the day before, had made some mistakes by talking about the so-called Libyan model for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump said that was not a good statement and that making it was not smart. In April last year, Bolton said North Korea's denuclearization should follow the precedent set with Libya, which means giving up nuclear weapons in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. But Libya also calls to mind the fate of its late leader, Muammar Gaddafi, who was overthrown and killed. Trump also said he's going to announce a new national security advisor next week, and reports say Secretary of State Pompeo is being considered for a double role.
This week's Bongzai is Dr. Kissinger and nuclear weapons. Dr. Henry Kissinger, one of the most famous scholars in international politics, has recently become the center of attention in South Korea after he was quoted by U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Mr. Stephen Biegun, last week. In his speech delivered at the University of Michigan, Mr. Biegun said, "I fear Dr. Kissinger is correct that if the international community fails in this undertaking, North Korea will not be the last state in East Asia to acquire nuclear weapons. But it is not likely that South Korea go nuclear." In his interview with CNN in September 2017, President Moon Jae-in stated that he did not agree with the idea of South Korea developing its own nuclear weapons or bringing in U.S. tactical nuclear weapons from the United States in response to North Korea's nuclear threats. So, no reasons to be alarmed about nuclear arms race in Northeast Asia. That's all we have for you this episode of Peace and Prosperity. Thank you for tuning in and see you next week.